So I've got everything in an Excel spreadsheet. I track 98, 99% of the time all of the board games that I've played. And it's not like a super analysis like with Warhammer 40,000 or X-Wing Miniatures or Battletech. It's more like, here's the title, here's when we played it, whether it was solo or with some friends, and maybe like a note or two. Not only did we win or lose, but what was the experience? Did we all have a lot of fun, or was there a frustrating part of the game, or did something work? Did something not work? Is it like, Fritz, this is an awesome game, paint up the miniatures, so put that in. And it's interesting when I go back and sort it, and I go and look over the years, that certain titles rise to the top. Certain titles rise to the top. And these titles are not always weighted where it's like, well, look, this is the oldest game in my collection, so of course it's going to have the most plays. There are a couple of titles that have that, but there are a couple of newer titles that have risen to the top. And it's interesting. I'm not saying like I'm zapping this through BI, but it's interesting to just see how things rise up and down over time, looking at that analysis. And it's pretty complete. There's a couple of places here and there that are missing, but since 2008, it's that obsessive personality keeping track of these things. And there's one title in my collection. There's one title in my collection that always rises to the top. Yes, because it's the oldest, but also because it's been on an interesting journey with me. And it's gotten me through some pretty interesting, some pretty dark times. And that sounds a little bit ominous, but it's been a constant companion. And that kind of leads to the question for today's Board Gaming Enthusiast vlog. Titles in your collection, and maybe it's one, maybe it's multiples, that have just been there for you, have been on this journey of board gaming, have been on this journey called life, not the game of life, but the game of life, that just when you pull it out, when you look at it, it's got weight. It has history behind it. You know, it really has a special spot in your heart for board gaming. And I want to share the title that's the number one title for me, but also a little bit of that experience to see if it mirrors your own, and to really kind of point out that this board gaming thing, this hobby, there's a lot to it. You know, there's a lot to it on the social side and on the journey side, on that narrative side. So in 2008, what got me into board gaming was I was obsessively playing Warhammer 40,000, a sci-fi miniatures game. I was playing Battletech, but it was under control. I was playing Dungeons and Dragons, and I was leading a D&D game. And I was fortunate to be at a point in my life where I could go out and experience these different gaming groups and gaming personalities. And a friend of mine had introduced me to a couple of board games that kind of played like role-playing games. And that got me really intrigued. Now, I knew board games existed out there, and I had played a few, but with friends, it was stuff, well, do Settlers count as a hardcore Euro? You know, maybe back in the day. But it was just basically counting wool and sheep and building stuff. And that was kind of cool, but I was looking for something with a little bit more action, a little bit more drama. And I was introduced to a couple of titles that were close to role-playing games. And of course, that's been the holy grail of board gaming, to be able to have a board gaming experience emulate a role-playing game. And there are some titles out there over the years that do that very, very well and are very, very ambitious. In exploring that, I was introduced to Runebound, because I had a friend that said, Fritz, you should check out Runebound. This is Runebound's second edition. They're like, it's a quest game. You get some items, you fight some stuff. There's an end story. It works, and it's got some interesting mechanics in terms of the movement dice and 3 phases, fighting in the D10. So I picked up Runebound's second edition. I think this was 2008. Second edition came out 2005, 2006. So it was kind of at the start of that, or midway through. There might have been 1 or 2 expansions at the time. Fantasy Flight, really putting out those expansions. But I sat down and I really started to play Runebound, and I really started to get into it. And we would play it sometimes where I would bring it along with Talisman to the D&D gaming group. And if we finished up early, sometimes you're playing D&D and you have an open schedule, but the way the flow of the narrative and the adventure goes, you're like, we still have like an hour to play, but this is a good point to stop in the quest because we're at a natural stopping point. Next week, we can figure out where we're going to go. We can now have a little time to level up. So there were times where we had some extra time or just it's like, look, we're not quite ready to go home. Let's pull out some board games. So I would pull out Runebound. And it was nice playing with my friends and generating that feeling, generating that narrative where it's like we got the D&D quest vibe going. Now we're getting the board gaming vibe going. And it was a nice way for me as a dungeon master to kind of wind down and play that. So we would play Runebound. Now, Runebound 2nd edition and some of these games, I'm not saying it's a criteria, they solo perfectly. Runebound 2nd edition didn't really care if you were playing with 3 or 4 players or you were playing multiple characters yourself or even playing one character. You know, the idea is it's a fantasy race type game, a race to the end where you got to defeat Vorakesh and stop him from raising up the Dragon Lords in the core game. But the expansions have a similar feel to it. So what I started to notice was I would play this solo because there would be times where I was unable to go to the gaming club or something shifted or changed, or I'm like, I just feel like rolling some dice. I feel like doing something. I could pull it out and play. And that got me introduced to the idea of solo board gaming. Now, I like the narrative. I love the idea of board gaming, sitting down with friends, stepping out of space and time, rolling some dice, having some fun. My number one rule is there's always room at the table. So I love playing with lots and lots of players, and I have no problem breaking game mechanics and playing more. Talisman, we've played games 10, 12, 15 players. We've played Zombicide, Invader, or Black Plague. It settles on 6 most of the missions. We've played 8 or 10. We'll just throw out a couple of extra spawn cards. Let's just see what happens. We played Pathfinder the Adventure card game with more than recommended, and we'll just add some more to the timer deck. So I have no problem breaking or experimenting or tweaking because for me, the social aspects, the more players, the more fun, the more dice, the more crazy stuff that happens. But this took things in an interesting direction, deviating from that, and that is still my preferred way to play. But this then led to Runebound just kind of playing solo and exploring the possibility of playing board games from that solo perspective. So now I have a title that brought me into, it has the weight, it has that nostalgia of bringing me into the board gaming community and playing that. It has awesome memories from playing D&D and playing other times and just tying that in. It led me to solo, the serious possibility of solo board gaming, and the interesting idea that truly you could play solo board games and that's your experience. It's interesting to see that polarity. Of course, there's always some crossover, but some people prefer one over the other. But there's also times where things dictate that. So at some point, my work schedule shifted. I was going to school. I was working on, at the time, launching my own business. Like, everything was up in the air. It was crazy. And I found where, just based on the timing, for a while, I couldn't regularly make it to the gaming club to play. I couldn't even run my regular D&D group. We had to go on hiatus for a little bit because I'm like, guys, I can't commit to meeting every week or every other week. Maybe we could do a one-off adventure here and there, but I just, over these next 6 months or so, I just need to power through and just get through these 3 things on the list. I just need to put them and take care of them. So because of that schedule, not only was gaming completely solo, gaming was I'd get home at 11, unwind, get something to eat. It's midnight. I need to go to bed, but I'm also I just need a little time to chill. I just need a little time to unwind. And I didn't want to jump online. I was playing DDO at the time. That's another story. That was, I love DDO. I love it. I became so obsessed with it, I had to step away. And I know to this day, I hear the voices of the guild calling me, and I'm like, maybe I'll check out DDO again. Maybe I'll jump into that again. I'm like, I can't, because I know where I'll go. So to balance that out, I was like, I'm going to play board games solo. And for 6 months, I I mean, I had other titles that I enjoyed, but I played Runebound. And no kidding, it really helped me get through a lot at that time because I felt very isolated. I felt very overwhelmed doing all these things. A lot of that pressure just put on myself. But in that moment, late at night, to unplug, to be analog, to be old school, to roll some dice and see where I can move, and then flip over the encounter card and look at it and read the text and just pause for a second and visualize my character, fighting that and rolling the dice and making the decisions. I just had Runebound set up permanently for like half a year and playing it out and exploring it and having that as like a pocket world to enter. That really helped me get through a lot. It really helped me get through some interesting times. Now to the point where I tend to play 3rd edition a little bit more than 2nd edition. I know that's heresy for the Runebound enthusiasts, but Runebound 2nd edition, I still regularly play it out. I still regularly bring it out. I still regularly look at some of the variants and kind of go on the message boards and see what's going on with this great game. And it has gotten me through a lot. It has built a lot of memories. It has been there as my number one ranked board game, not only in plays, but in how it has affected my perception of the board gaming experience. So now I'm going to turn it over to you guys. What's that one title in your collection, if you can isolate it to one? I mean, there's other titles in my collection too that are close, that are up there. Warhammer Quest, the card game, is one of them. But again, isolating it would just be Runebound. What's that one title that's been with you through the entire journey? Maybe it reflects it in the box and the components where it has seen many, many plays and kind of has that characteristic. Maybe it's something that you picked up recently and it was transformative because you're like, wow, this has shifted my perception of what a board game is. And you're just at the start of your journey with that title. Or maybe it's just something that's been on and off at different times, but it's really affected your perception of what the board gaming experience is. So I'm just curious, what is that title? And what kind of impact has it had on you and this amazing, amazing hobby